21st, and we're going to continue learning about the fiscal year 26 budget request, various stakeholders who are often in front of us, and we're going to wrap up what we started yesterday with Jennifer Pullman. Thank you for your flexibility and for being here. Over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Jennifer Pullman. Oh, please tell me I did not. There we go. I was like, please tell me I did not freeze. I'm Jennifer Pullman, the director of the Vermont Center for Crime Victim Services. And with me is Carol Brochu, our director of finance and administration. I appreciate the committee having us back today. We had just been speaking about the wonderful world of federal funds and the havoc that is wreaking on victim services in Vermont and on funding, and had started talking about our special funds. The three special funds, again, that the center administers are the Victims Compensation Special Fund, the Restitution Special Fund, and the Domestic and Sexual Violence Fund. And I did bother Nate again to repost some of the documents. So you'll find our budget overview summary on the committee page, as well as two other documents that I'll refer to. With respect to the special funds, we again had talked about this yesterday, I'm just reminding folks about the decline that was noted prior to 2013. And this, I really didn't get into this, but this decline that we continue to see despite efforts by this body is related to really external factors that are good changes for the a variety of reasons. A lot of it is, in this committee has noted this, policy changes. Criminal justice reform has created different ways in which we address crime. We've decriminalized some pieces. Driving with license suspended is one of the ones that has been addressed in the past. And I know this committee has recognized the impact of decriminalization on our funds. Mr. Chair, the other day you had talked about some wholesale dismissals, and I was on the other end of my computer saying, no, because even though it's a good idea policy-wise that we can certainly agree with, we're in this awkward position where again, philosophically, we can totally agree, but we think about the impact on our budgets, and it is very real because we're at that point where every single fee, every single fine makes a difference. The other piece is just that in the heyday, law enforcement was pulling people over pretty frequently. I was a victim of them many times. And those contributions on traffic tickets were very robust to the funds and did provide a lot of support for these special funds. Practice has changed, however, for a variety of reasons. Law enforcement is not prioritizing these pieces. There's a recognition in some counties that perhaps that can lead to stops that create additional criminal charges, pretext stops, and also that we all know that law enforcement is struggling to even keep their numbers as they should in vacancies. So those are all external factors that are not going to change, and nor should they. We shouldn't be worried about how we treat somebody who's committed what is an act that we currently have a crime because it impacts a budget. We really need to separate those two pieces. So as I mentioned, all the funds are continuing to look at declines, continuing to experience deficits. Currently, the Victims Compensation Special Fund is at a decline of 50% over the past 5 years and is at $562,000 in terms of a projected deficit. This has been in decline, and also, we're struggling with some of the very real impacts of the increase in homicides. As we know, that's an all-time high in Vermont, and that significantly impacts our fund because all family members of somebody who's been killed are eligible for their own claim. So that has a very direct impact on us. It's not the reason for the decline, but it compounds it. The restitution fund is at a deficit projected at $324,000. And we have attempted to mitigate that in the past by decreasing how much victims are eligible from the fund as an advancement. But we did not make any changes when we did the surcharge fix restitution. Currently, the fund is supported with a 15% 15% surcharge on fees and fines. We did not make any changes when we changed the surcharge a couple of years ago. And the Domestic and Sexual Violence Fund is at a deficit. Again, despite the continued efforts of this body, we're looking at a $93,000 projected deficit. And I do again want to emphasize that these programs have been flat funded for about 15 years. With respect to our ask, what was asked of me yesterday was, what can we do to address this? And certainly you could appropriate general funds, and that's where we're going to go ultimately, whether they be ongoing or one time, to address these deficits and provide much needed support. We think about the current mechanism of, you could tinker with the surcharge, but we don't really think it makes sense to continue to expect to get blood from a stone. You tried that based on the recommendation of JFO, and it hasn't worked out. So I just don't think that that's going to be the answer. So as far as sort of our one suggestion is, again, you could address it by appropriating funds. You could also take a look at the JFO report again. It did include 7 recommendations. And again, that is attached. 3 of which you have addressed. There was the fix to the surcharge, which you implemented. There was the marriage license increase for the Domestic Sexual Violence Fund. And then you shifted the burden of funding the victim advocates that are in the state's attorney's office from the victims compensation program to general fund dollars. So 3 of those 7 recommendations you did implement. There are 4 others that you might want to take a look at. One is the recommendation to divert a portion of the criminal traffic fines from the transportation fund. That was a recommendation. There was a recommendation to explore a tax on alcohol sales, to implement a surcharge on motor vehicle registrations, and to study, again, the potential of making some additional fees or surcharges on the purchase of alcohol and firearms. So not probably the easiest options to explore. You did implement 3 of them. Those are 4 other ones that the JFO had recommended exploring. I do want to suggest, though, that out of this JFO report, I mentioned this yesterday, you will see that they detail all the different special funds that they were able to identify. And again, our 3 funds are in serious decline. Some other special funds have been, but that's kind of their butter. This is our bread. And one of the pieces that you'll note on that report, and it was mentioned on page 5, is that the SIU special fund has doubled over the same time period. And again, they asked the question why. I asked the author of the report if he knew why. And we really came down to the conclusion that we couldn't guess what caused that. But I did mention that Hawaii has a priority of payment statute, which I've attached. And I think it might be worth exploring whether we need to prioritize those funds that create a mechanism of directly providing support for victims, either in terms of financial support or programmatic support above some of the other fees and fines. And that was those are sort of the 3 different ways that we could think of in terms of what else we can do, because we've really done everything that we can. And we hate to keep coming back every single year and asking for another Band-Aid, but we are here yet again. And the VOCA deficit is really, again, one of the more troubling pieces, because it provides support, as I mentioned, to 46 different individual programs in our communities. It's the network programs, child advocacy centers in your community, restorative justice programs, legal services for victims of crime, to address all of the issues that they're faced with, both within the criminal justice process and outside of it. Human trafficking positions, grants to underserved grants to programs that work with underserved communities. So I don't know, when I think about that list, and we think about that list, how do we even contemplate where we're going to make these cuts when we know that these programs are out there working as hard as they can, bare bones already? We're asking them to do more with less, without cost of living. And so we're really confronted with a situation that we don't really know what to do. without a fix. We don't really know because not a single one of those programs is not overworked and is not absolutely necessary. So our requests are as follows. We are asking for $1.5 million for general fund dollars, either one time or base would certainly be appreciated. But this would address the shortfall that we mentioned yesterday, that $1.1 million loss in 1 year of VOCA funding to support these programs. And it would also reflect a modest increase to recognize that these individuals are coming back to work every single day without a cost of living. And I think about the advocates that do this work, and some individuals are compensated who do this work are compensated well and do receive some additional benefits, do receive those cost of living. And I think about the impact on the morale of the individuals who are doing this work who don't have that, and how they keep coming to work and doing this work. The compensation program, we're asking for $600,000 to support that program. This program, again, provides direct payments to victims, and also supports our 3 program staff who do all the claims for the state. We did mention the homicide increases, and that, also we're seeing that victims' needs are becoming more complex and expensive. But again, this is not the reason for the decline, but it does compound it, and it compounds the future vision for what we expect in terms of expenses and impact. We've been trying to mitigate the impacts on this fund by trying to strip away some of the pieces that we were funding with it, that were external to the actual explicit purpose of it. So for example, the victim advocate program that now lies with the state's attorney's office, upwards of $700,000 a few years ago, was actually coming out of our compensation fund to support that. We've been funding 2 network positions and supervised visitation programs with the compensation fund, and we just simply, unfortunately, can't do that because we're looking at the fact that we might not be able to be making direct payments to victims, and that was the reason that you set up the fund in the first place. And I know sometimes we've heard that it feels like, and not really from this committee, but feels like Vermont's bailing out the federal government. And I really want to just name the fact that for us sitting here, we sort of feel like the federal government, by providing all this funding for many years, has kind of taken the burden off of Vermont. And so it really is a time where I don't see that as something where Vermont's stepping in, because you are stepping in, but in theory, these are core services that, again, should be provided by the state. With respect to the restitution unit, again, this is a program established in state law. It does not receive any general fund dollars at all. And we've tried to mitigate the losses to the fund. We have not filled positions. We've decreased the amount that individuals can receive from the fund as an advancement from $10,000 to $5,000. We did not adjust the surcharge when we made this fix a couple of years ago, that 15%. It's still the same as it was. And I really am not going to recommend revisiting that percentage because it doesn't make sense to keep tinkering with a declining revenue source. With respect to our final ask, we are asking for $115,000 to support our administration of funding for which we currently do not receive. We receive about $2.3 million currently in straight pass-through funding that is granted out directly to programs, and we do not receive any administrative support for that. You heard a little bit yesterday about what we do and what's involved in administering and overseeing grants. And, the center relies upon VOCA for most of its administrative expenses. And so that decrease hurts us as well. And like other state agencies that you've heard from, we have the same impacts with the increase in healthcare, disability, insurance, and the like. But we are not state employees, so we're not able to take advantage of a much cheaper plan were we to be state employees. So we're having to foot those expenses ourselves. So that would go a long way to helping us keep our doors open. With respect to the Domestic and Sexual Violence Fund, I did mention that that is in decline. We did not make a specific ask for that because I know Sarah will be presenting their ask, but we certainly do support it. Again, they're looking at a $93,000 deficit. They provide amazing services despite the level funding. And we really would appreciate your consideration of help for that fund. Just in summation, we really want to avoid a situation when people are looking for help, needing help, asking for help, and we can't help them. We don't want to create environments where people don't come forward because they say, why would I bother? We want to address trauma because we know what happens when we don't address trauma. We speak often about the criminal not the trauma history of those who are charged with crimes. We know what happens with unaddressed trauma in terms of substance misuse and other factors as well. So we want to address the trauma when we can, when we have that opportunity. And we really would appreciate your consideration of our request because we believe that that will go a long way to keeping the doors open for programs that are doing the work when people need help, that when people are asking for support in terms of addressing safety and basic needs, that these programs can do that and create a climate and a culture where that is possible. So thank you very much for your time and your support, and we appreciate your consideration of our request.
Great, thank you. No, that was thorough, and I know we have some of the documents that explain this as well on our website. But any questions from folks? Angela.
Well, thank you so much, Jennifer. It's not really a question. I was talking with the Women's Caucus hosted Brian Lowe yesterday to talk to us a little bit about the Treasurer's Task Force on the federal transition. And I mentioned, I think I had just come from his committee to that meeting. And so fresh on my mind, of course, was your mention of VOCA funds. And I asked him if the task force was pulling together some kind of, or I would call a watch list, basically to let us know which state agencies and departments have what percentage of federal funds, and if those federal funds might be in danger or not. And he shared with us a JFO report that says that 55% of the Center for Crime Victim Services percentage of total fiscal year 2025 appropriations, 55% of your appropriation is from federal funds. So does that sound about right to you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it does. And we receive, again, as I mentioned yesterday, very little in general fund dollars. So
right. And I remember
things happen at the federal level, we're very stressed.
Yeah. And I think in your presentation, there's the pie chart. So I guess I just wanted to stress that point again, because it's really concerning to me, given the uncertainty at the federal level, and coupled with the importance of the work you're doing and its direct impact on Vermonters. And it's just really, I'm really hopeful that we will do what we can to close the gap and the potential gap. I think that's what I'm most concerned about, maybe, is that even if we could get to the 1.5 million that you're asking for, that's to cover a loss that you've already endured. And so that's not covering the additional VOCA funds that may go away. So it's all very concerning.
Thank you for that. And often I do question myself in my job and wonder if I advocate for enough, because we honestly do come forward and ask for stuff to keep the doors open. But in this case, I'm going to go a little bit out on a limb and say it's time to give a little bit of an increase for the programs that haven't received a cost of living.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. All right, other questions? Not seeing any. Thank you very much again for your flexibility, and thank you for the presentation and the great information that will help us understand this. So
thank you very much, and good luck at game night. Thank you.
Well, I think you should be invited too, All right, Sarah Robinson, if you could join us and proceed after identifying yourself for the record.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. For the record, Sarah Robinson, I'm the co-executive director of the Vermont Network Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. Thank you so much for having me back to talk about our request for the FY26 budget. As you know, because we've talked to you about this before, we represent a coalition of 15 independent nonprofit member organizations that provide advocacy and support to survivors of violence. And in 2024, our member organizations answered 22,000 hotline calls from Vermonters, over 22,000 hotline calls from Vermonters seeking support, and provided in-person advocacy to 8,422 individuals. And despite this essential work, these organizations have been flat funded through Vermont's Domestic and Sexual Violence Special Fund for 15 years. The fund was originally established in 2008, and its revenues are comprised of two sources of fines and fees. And Jen noted this in her testimony. So it is a surcharge on civil and criminal court judgments, and it's a $13.50 surcharge on those judgments, and as well as a surcharge on marriage licenses. Right now in Vermont, it costs $80 for a marriage license, and $50 from that $80 goes to the Domestic and Sexual Violence Special Fund. So those two surcharges combine to support approximately $784,000 in expenses. And that $784,000 is distributed out to Vermont's 15 service providers using a funding formula. And that really ensures that all regions of the state receive equitable resources. The fund has experienced significant declines over the past 10 years, with a deficit each year since FY15, with the exception of just one fiscal year. And so we've had to come to the General Assembly and ask for annual one-time appropriations to make the fund whole and prevent cuts. And I'm sure, as you can imagine, for our victim advocates who are working day in and day out with victims of domestic and sexual violence, keeping shelter doors open, keeping hotlines open 24 hours a day, accompanying victims to court, it's difficult to each year be coming back simply to prevent cuts and have that be the goal. So in FY26, the fund is again facing an estimated shortfall of just under $100,000. In addition to the state landscape, the shifting federal landscape poses very unique challenges to our field, which is heavily dependent on federal funds. Combined, the Vermont Network and our member organizations rely on $12 million in federal funds. And our member organizations are majority federally funded, over 50%. For some member organizations, federal funds actually comprise 90% of their total budgets. And we are already seeing in other states cuts and layoffs at rape crisis centers and domestic violence shelters. We're monitoring those impacts in Vermont. So far, we've been able to avoid them, but it is a deeply concerning landscape right now. And this uncertainty is really threatening the promise that we make to Vermonters that there will be access to services 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in any community in the state. So we have two requests for the FY26 state budget. I have provided some documents to Nate. They're posted on your committee website, but under yesterday's date. So feel free to look at those there. So the first request is that we estimate that the Domestic and Sexual Violence Special Fund that now supports $784,000 in expenses really eventually needs to be able to support $5 million in expenses annually. We know that that's going to be a multi-year endeavor, and we'll be seeking a blend of general fund dollars and other revenue sources to meet that need. But in FY26, we're requesting an initial investment of $1.2 million in base general funds. And this $1.2 million will do a few things. It's going to preserve several staff positions that otherwise will be cut due to being moved out of the Victim Compensation Fund, as Jen noted. It will fill that just under $100,000 projected deficit in the special fund for FY26, and it will adjust the distributions to Vermont Network member organizations for inflationary increases for their period of flat funding to stabilize core services for survivors. So that first ask is $1.2 million in base general fund dollars. Second is we're requesting that the legislature consider creating a $4.1 million contingency fund for domestic and sexual violence organizations for use if federal funds are eliminated. We understand that there are $4.1 million in excess general fund and human services caseload reserves, which could be used for this purpose and then reappropriated next year in the event that the contingency fund is not needed. So we feel like that would provide us essentially with an insurance policy in the instance that federal funds are cut or cut significantly, especially while the legislature is out of session. So those are our two asks for this year. I'm more than happy to talk to you in greater depth about what that looks like or what those appropriations would look like for our member organizations in your communities. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Questions for Sarah? I don't see. I think this is relatively straightforward. We've had a lot of background and understand the great services that the network providers provide. So no, I really appreciate that. And if we do have more questions, as we're kind of developing our budget memo recommendations, we'll certainly reach out. So.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, have a good weekend. Thanks. Thank you. All right, so we're gonna now turn to hear from the folks working out in the field in the state's attorney's offices. And I guess we'll start with Zach Waite, Deputy State's Attorney from Washington County. Thank you for taking some time this afternoon to kind of share what's happening out there in the field and the state's attorney's offices. So just identify yourself for the record and proceed. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Zach Waite. I'm a deputy state's attorney in Washington County. Our office and the courthouse is in North Main Street in Barry. Prior to that, I spent 10 years as a public defender, pretty much all around the state, defending people in the criminal system. So I've spent the past 12, 13 years since law school being involved in criminal law. The moment we find ourselves in as deputy state's attorneys, victim advocates, and administrative support staff is that the criminal cases and individuals keep coming into the court system, but our resources and our funding is not matching the challenge we're up against. And so I know that Tim and Annie have shared with you the statistics of the caseload. I can talk more specific on what that actually results in the day-to-day. So 350 cases as a deputy state's attorney is quite burdensome. What it is not a reflection of the charges, because one case could have one charge or it could have multiple charges. But it is a reflection of the fact that as a deputy state's attorney with 350 cases, I have the least burden in the office because the victim advocates have double, if not more, and the administrative support staff have every single case in the office that they touch and work on. It forces us to spend a lot of time triaging, making decisions, essentially on a hierarchy of what is most important and pressing to address right now versus actually having the opportunity to dive into a case, do the research, review every body camera, all the documents. And most importantly, I find, especially when it comes to what we deal with people. And we deal with not just victims of crime and criminal defendants, but we deal with people in the community who live there and pay taxes and vote. And they have seen, I think, over the years, certainly since I started as a public defender, what we have seen over the years is there's less and less face time. There's less ability for us, as specifically speaking as a deputy state's attorney, to sit down with a witness or a victim of a crime, to prep them, to talk about them, hear their story, to answer any questions about what for a non-lawyer can seem like a very complicated criminal process. My caseload is mainly, I would say, drug cases mixed with kind of violent misdemeanors and violent felonies. I'm I do want to address certain things related to our work as a deputy state's attorney, which in relation to who you're going to hear from, Megan and Jennifer, which is if even as deputy state's attorneys, if we're doing well and we have the resources we need as attorneys, if the victim advocates are overburdened, that directly impacts my ability to do my job because I don't work in a vacuum. I work with a team in the office, and that's really what prosecution is. It's a team effort. We need, obviously, the police officers, the prosecutors, but the victim advocates are front lines with all the victims, ranging from business owners who are robbed to people who are sexually assaulted and domestically assaulted, or family members of those who unfortunately were killed, and in between. And the administrative support staff of how they interplay with the deputy state's attorney is discovery, notices, scheduling, making sure that, I'm where I'm supposed to be at sometimes at the most basic level, that the case itself is put together and ready to turn over to the defense attorney or to multiple defense attorneys, which is also becoming an issue. How that impacts our work also is with more cases and less people to do them is not only less time to spend on each case, right? Now we're at minutes for each case, including the most serious felonies, when we should be hours and days on average. But that means more and more hearings are being continued or cases are taking longer to resolve because the court docket is so maxed out already, and there's only one of me handling those 350 cases. And I think that plays kind of directly into the sheriff's role, which is as transport deputies. Without more of them, more people will sit in jail and have to participate by WebEx. And this is a great system. It was a great investment by the court. I think it has opened the door for access to justice for people who, don't have motor vehicles or live far away but want to participate. But the one detriment is that with criminal defendants who are in custody, we spend the first 5 to 10 minutes of a hearing just making sure they can hear us, making sure it's the right person in the cell, making sure they can hear us. And even when they say, yeah, I can hear you, Judge. I'll be honest, I don't think they can most of the time, because they will ask questions like, what did my lawyer say? Or what does the state want to do? Even though I've just articulated on the record under a microphone exactly the state's ask. It also impacts their ability to, in real time, talk with their attorney. And so that's really a difference of access to justice and justice for people who aren't incarcerated versus people who are incarcerated. And the transport deputies will allow the court to more efficiently and effectively get these individuals to court. That impacts my job as a deputy state's attorney because it slows down the process, which means a case can resolve that day, but because the individual can't hear us and can't talk to his attorney, we now have to reschedule it. And so because the court calendar is already maxed out, that hearing, which everyone agrees should be in a couple of days, is actually set a couple of weeks out, whether the person's released that hearing or remains to be held. Another aspect that I will say about my job in particular, the cases we deal with are becoming exceptionally more complex. And there is no difference really when you're a deputy state's attorney between a felony domestic assault or a misdemeanor domestic assault, when the issues are complex, when they're messy, when they involve human emotion and familiar relationships, and when you need an expert to either challenge the defense's argument that the defendant was insane at the time of the offense, or the defendant is claiming they're not competent. The defendants are hiring experts. And what I'm finding through the state system is I am struggling, one, to even identify experts because Vermont's such a small community. Most of the experts I'm hiring are from Boston or certainly outside the state. But two is it's always a conversation that boils down to not do we need it or should we get it? Those are yes, easy. The conversation really becomes, can we afford it? And what that ultimately ends up meaning is that I, or more likely my boss, the elected state's attorney, has to sit with a victim and the victim's advocate and explain that we're going to resolve this case for X because we don't have the money to pay for an expert to challenge what the defendant is claiming. And that's a really big burden because a lot of these cases, whether they're retail thefts, which we're seeing more and more of, become complicated, or they're violent crimes, whether misdemeanors or felonies, because of the mental health related issues the individuals are experiencing, because of the at times co-occurring substance abuse issues. And as a lawyer, I like to think I'm an expert, but in court, I'm not on those issues, and I need to hire somebody. So that's kind of a brief encapsulation, I would say, of the challenges that are faced by a lot of deputy state's attorneys across the state. I have more, but I'll stop there because I don't want to take all the time.
Go ahead, Karen.
Thank you for being here. I feel like this really reinforces testimony we've heard already of that there's the kind of gap is shifting down, like last year we focused on judiciary and now it's just like we need more state's attorney coverage to keep up with things. And so I know we've heard a lot from Tim as the department for state's attorneys and sheriffs. So with funding coming in, my understanding how it goes is it goes to the department and then funding is kind of goes out to the different counties. Do you feel like that system is working? Because if we do add extra funding, there's no guarantee that it gets to your specific county or another county that's asking for it. Like there's this system where it goes to the department and the department then bundles it out. Just wanting to see if there's work that needs to be done there too, or is it purely just money is the situation? It's not how it gets to each individual department.
I'll say this, as a deputy state's attorney, I'm not involved in the meetings of the 14 in the executive office about budgetary issues. So from my perspective, I think that Tim and Annie in the executive office are incredibly reachable, reasonable, and responsive to the needs individual offices have. And I think that working with, my elected in my county here, Michelle Donnelly and the other 13 with Tim and Annie, they'll be able to use the funding provided and requested, and the 6 victim advocates, the 4 deputies, in a way that does alleviate that burden. What I would be concerned about is having the House or the Senate make a decision that, say, Washington County needs more resources than Rutland County, or Chittenden needs more resources than Franklin County. I think that the best model is for the state's attorney system itself to internally have those discussions, that debate between the 14 elected and Tim's office, and for them to decide the best way to utilize those resources. Where I work here in Washington County, we are, I think everyone in the office would agree that we are burdened and the caseload should be less. If we had an additional person or 2 additional people, that would be the case. But we are also one of the counties that is moving cases, that is very good at clearing, if there is a backlog, focusing on those cases. And that, and thankfully that comes from our leadership at the top with S.A. Donnelly of saying, hey, let's take a focus on this approach and keep moving forward. Some counties have a lot more cases that are backlogged than Washington. And so I would trust Annie and Kim and the 14 electeds to make that decision. But I think it should be an internal decision.
I'm not trying to cause any, I think it's important to point out that if we give funding, it goes to the department level and then those decisions are made. So It could be that, there was an increase in funding, but it didn't come to your county or something. So I just want to put that out there that.
Yeah, no, I understand that. And I think that's a real possibility. I think as a deputy state's attorney within Washington County, I don't operate in a vacuum, in that I work with victim advocates, Erica Back and Holly Leach, and I work with our administrative staff. I think the counties also don't operate in a vacuum. I mean, constantly emailing other deputy state's attorneys and Megan and Jennifer, and we're talking about, hey, we just charged this person. We see they have your case, you're charged. Can we shift? I have one case, you've got 7. Can you guys take this? Those conversations are constantly happening. So I think kind of any resources that is given to the department, I think the department's going to be able to utilize them in the best way.
Very helpful. Other questions?
Thanks for coming in today. I have one that's more a clarifying question than it is anything else. And I'm sure that you're aware of all the testimony that we've been receiving in recent weeks and even recent days. And one point of clarification I'm curious about is I'm under the impression, or I think this committee was left under the impression that depositions are being handled on the criminal side, oftentimes by the AG's office. And I'm talking about your and like you listing out your responsibilities. One of the things that you mentioned pretty explicitly is deposition. So I'm just kind of curious if you can delineate between what you guys are doing, what you and your staff are responsible for, where you're getting additional support from other resources, and where you think, obviously that you could be supported further.
Yes, thank you for the question. So under Vermont, I guess it's a Vermont rule of criminal procedure, is depositions are only allowed in felony cases unless the judge allows it in a special misdemeanor case for a reason. So in every single felony case that any state's attorney's office is handling, regardless of the prosecutor in that office, a deposition in that felony case is available for the defense as well as for the state. So if there are 8,000 pending felonies, you can look for 8,000 plus depositions to occur because there's at least a police officer and or a victim in that case. Where I'm in kind of a good position as a deputy because I don't have to deal with the asking other state agencies for resources. That's the elected's position. But I can tell you that the cases we're dealing with, as I mentioned, are becoming more complex with mental health and substance abuse issue. There are other cases that I think to a T, and I haven't asked every single deputy state's attorney, but I've talked to a lot of them, especially at our yearly training, and victim advocates as well. I think all strongly dislike the home improvement fraud cases for a couple of reasons. One is because it's really like a contract dispute. And you're essentially arguing, did the consumer get what they bargained for in the contract? Did they get robbed? Was there a deceptive trade practice is one of the things you can charge the person with. And then even if you can charge the person, the whole pretrial litigation and trial is all about the value of the work. The defendants typically, in my experience of home improvement fraud, have private attorneys and they get accountants and experts, which are other contractors saying, nope, that's not what the work's valued at. And I go back to the state, we have a decision to make of do we hire an expert in this felony violent crime or an expert in the home improvement fraud case. I think you see where we're going with the decision. And a fourth of the statute, maybe 40% of the statute, the home improvement fraud statute, is all about what happens after the conviction with the Attorney General's office. I think those cases, even though they're misdemeanors here in Vermont, they become so complex, and a home improvement fraud case could easily last a year to 2 years, just a misdemeanor one, because of the pretrial litigation. And that's without the defense attorney filing a motion to dismiss, complaining that the statute's unconstitutional, which is what our county is dealing with in one of the cases. But we are criminal attorneys. We're not consumer protection attorneys. We're not contracts attorneys. I think that home improvement fraud might be, don't hold me to it, and maybe Tim can speak on this as well, but I think home improvement fraud might be the only criminal case where it actually involves whether a contract's terms were violated or not. I can't think of anything else off the top of my head. And weirdly, they're misdemeanors, but in every other jurisdiction and under federal law, they're considered felonies because of the 2 years. Same thing with the misdemeanor domestic assaults and negligent operation with serious bodily injury. DUIs have a 2-year max. And so what I don't want the committee to do is leave here with the belief that, oh, well, there are misdemeanors and those are easy to deal with cases, because most of the home improvement fraud cases tend to be misdemeanors and they go for a year, year and a half. And speaking as a lawyer, I'm not very good at math. So most of my, I think, legal colleagues aren't. That's why a large part we're in the law field. And so having to deal with money and financial exploitation of vulnerable adults when there's already agencies in the Secretary of State's office or the Attorney General's office that deal with those registries, those licenses, certifications, I think from my perspective as Deputy State's Attorney, it makes more sense for them to have it.
Thanks for that. I appreciate your work you're doing.
Tom, then Ian.
As a practicing attorney, the boots on the ground, so to speak, out there performing work, what do you find is the most effective way to handle cases? Or what's the difference? I know you explained it a little bit with the virtual hearing, but having parties present in the courtroom, the defendant and the defense attorney, does that help facilitate resolution
Yes.
easier?
Yes, absolutely. 100%. I think WebEx is good, especially for busy private attorneys and public defenders who have to be in multiple counties. But there is no doubt if everyone is in the room, it is overwhelmingly more likely the case is going to resolve at that status conference than having to set another status conference for the person to show up. In addition, a lot of criminal defendants who are using the public defense system, the only time they meet with some of their attorneys is at the status conference in person. And so if that person can only call in, they never get that opportunity to actually explain, hey, here's the state's offer. Here's what it means. Oh, after the hearing, you have to go up in Barrie, for instance, you have to go upstairs to sign up for Department of Corrections. So WebEx is good, but I think there's a lot of negatives with it. I think human interaction is great. Before COVID, I'll tell you, I was a public defender up in Franklin County. Before COVID, we used to settle cases standing in the hallway, the defense attorneys and prosecutors, 5-minute conversation, boom. And you could move the 10 cases you had on that day. You could get a resolution, an agreement to a scheduling order, an agreement to, I'll file this motion if you do this. I think COVID and then the over-reliance on WebEx has kind of shifted that to, oh, I'll send an email and hope the person responds to me. And you lose the face-to-face, and the face-to-face is really where stuff gets done.
I appreciate it.
Just because we're talking budgets, when it comes to getting an expert, what is the process in your office? Do you have an amount that you have access to as far as funds to get experts and you have to make decisions, or is it just going out to your state's attorney and then they make the decision? And have you ever had a request for an expert declined because of a financial reason?
So the process, as I understand it and what I engage in, is we have an expert request form that as the deputy, we fill out, we identify who the expert is, how much they charge, where they're located, the name of the case, docket number, why we need them. And then I sign it, I submit it to my state's attorney. Ms. Donnelly reviews it all. And if she agrees, she signs it. And then I send it to the executive director's office, to Tim and Annie and Ashley and Barbara up there. And I've been a deputy state's attorney since April of 2023 is when I started in Washington County. I've never had an expert request denied, but I have had conversations about the budget and considerations of more like, hey, listen, we're capped here and there's 14 counties. So before I approve this, you need to go back to your expert and tell us how many hours they'll need to do this interview and assessment and then testify and travel. And so I think when you do that, when I have to go back to the expert and do that, typically the expert's response is at first like, I don't know, this could be 30 hours or there's 1,000 pages of records I need to review and it's 60 hours. I find that the doctors get frustrated with that, but I think it allows us to be able to say, well, you're going to be approved for 40 hours. So let's make it work because we need you. You want to do this. You think it's important. Let's do it. But I haven't had it denied yet.
Well, that's helpful. Oh, and only one other question.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I understand that every case has facts specific and, you can't speak too generally. But if I asked, like, what type of case is the most, like, time intensive and time demanding of your 350?
I would say any case from my caseload, any case that involves an act of violence against another person is the most intensive. I think if you were to look at the 30,000 foot level, homicides and sexual assaults are going to be the most, because those are going to take the longest. There's multiple, hearings, starting with the bail, the hearing, then with motions to suppress and stuff like that. But I think homicides are in their own kind of category. Setting them aside, I think the felony aggravated domestic assaults and misdemeanor domestic assaults are some of the most intensive work that we can do, not just emotionally in dealing with the people and the victims involved, but we have conversations with our SA and victim advocates in our office of, should we hire an expert in domestic violence to attempt at least to educate the jury on that, one, domestic violence happens, and two, the behavior of the defendant, which we're alleging is illegal, is actually pretty common in the domestic violence, domestic abuse, world. So crimes of violence, and there are a lot of crimes of violence that are misdemeanors. And we don't learn about that the person had maybe a felony level injury for months. And at that point, some judges say, nope, you're not allowed to amend it because this is already headed to trial.
Thank you.
Other questions? Thank you very much for this way. That was very helpful. Very helpful we don't have to hear the same old stories that Tim gives us, as far as his old stories. It's nice to get some, new just kidding. So Megan, if you could join us.
Sure. All my war stories are from Zach. Good afternoon, everybody.
Yeah, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me and for taking the time to consider our plight.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell us about your plight.
So sorry, I took notes on my phone because, I'm trying to be tech savvy and stuff. So my name is Megan Place. I am a victims advocate with the Windsor County State's Attorney's Office. I have been serving in this capacity for 17 years, 15 as a state's attorney victim advocate. I took a brief hiatus to the Department of Corrections, where I worked in victim services for 2 years before just returning a couple years ago to this role. And I actually want to lean into that a little bit because I think it speaks to the staffing issues that we're talking about here. COVID, as I'm sure you all have heard, really contributed to a backlog that became unmanageable. And we had some mass exodus as a result of that. For me, this is work that I'm it is who I am as a human being. I could never imagine doing anything else other than supporting victims and survivors of crime. And I left my position because I was carrying over 1,000 cases at the time. And I had a survivor that was murdered by her intimate partner after being released. And I couldn't handle that burden anymore. Our inability to be effectively responsive in the criminal legal system simply because we were too overburdened. That was just unacceptable to me. Zach did a really great job, I think, outlining the overview of what the day-to-day looks like for all of us and how we're all overwhelmed and the implications for access to justice and public safety, in a realm where that's what we hear about all the time, our public safety concerns. It just seems like adding insult to injury to just not be able. It's not like we're not doing the work. We're staying late. We are not taking vacation. We are working through lunch. I reached out to some of my colleagues just to make sure I was representing the totality of the experience across the state. And universally, the response was, I'm skipping lunch. We're getting hearing notices for hearings that are happening. The next business day that are important events for victims and survivors. So we're staying to make sure that they get notified, and we're disrupting their lives. These people who have already experienced harm and trauma, and we're putting a demand on them. But these are our voters. We are the voters, and it is not sustainable as is. I think you've probably heard from Tim and Annie, the average victim advocate caseload right now is 600. National best practices are like 150, 200. And in my office, I do the felony level intimate, all of the felony level intimate partner violence cases, and we do all of our own depositions. We are the office doing that. I have been with the state long enough to see things wax and wane. And there have been some really helpful legislative changes, like expansion of diversion really did take some burden off victim advocates. It did, especially for some of the lower level property crimes like retail theft or petty larceny, unlawful mischief, those sorts of things. But there are plenty of misdemeanor crimes that are, as Zach pointed out, intimate partner violence, motor vehicle cases with serious injuries. Some of the misdemeanors we're seeing are like a 20 count car break-in. Like, your communities are outraged by this, and somebody has to talk to them. The victim advocates and our administrative staff are the faces that they see. And the more overburdened we are, the less face time they're getting. As we just changed midpoint. We did a midpoint review recently. We've done sealing and expunging. We're the ones telling those people. We're the ones reaching out. Just before I came in here, I had to reach out to a domestic violence victim because her ex-husband filed for an expungement, and it had been pled down pre the law changing to a simple assault. And he filed to get his case expunged. It was incredibly re-traumatizing. And I spent 30 minutes on the phone with this woman. That's one of 600 cases. And like I said, one of those cases might be one case, but it might be 20 counts with 30 victims. Like, just the administrative burden on advocates and these are people's rights. They want to know what's happening. And we are the translators,
So we asked in an earlier hearing if the court, the Odyssey system could be set up that victims are on there and get notified of any filings or any status conference that are scheduled. I know that they would still have then a victim advocate to explain what those are, but would that take some of the administrative burden off of you potentially?
I think that we've flirted a lot with automated systems. And I think that and especially having worked at corrections and utilizing Vine, I do think that there's a place for it. I think it would take off some of the administrative burden for like potentially lower level property crimes. I don't know how comfortable I would be with it in terms of like sending a text to somebody who's a victim of intimate partner violence. Like, I don't even know if it's safe for them to get a text message. Like, some of these relationships are very nuanced where it's like, there's interactions you're working around and safety issues for victims and survivors. So I could see that being concerning.
Even be an opt-out kind of situation, just something that might be worth exploring.
Yeah, definitely.
Administrative.
Yeah, and I think from what I will say is like implementing Vine, which is the system that we have, has been incredibly ineffective. And as somebody that's worked on both sides of trying to utilize that system, it's easier said than done.
Right, that's just really DOC, right?
That's primarily DOC utilizes that, I think, to meet a lot of their statutory obligations. And my experience is that they're just not being met. That's my lived experience.
Yeah. So what does take up most of your time in that role?
Because I do the IPV cases, the face-to-face interactions that I'm trying to, and those are the things that fall by the wayside because we're just trying to meet our statutory obligations. So what I heard like overwhelmingly from my colleagues is like the things that are giving them anxiety is that they're just trying to do some of the more administrative, like we have to notify these people that this stuff is happening. And the hearings are complicated. The motions are complicated. Like, it took me 5 or 6 years to translate this. And I have to work really closely with my deputies and like, what does this mean so that I can explain to a victim, like, this is the motion, this is the potential outcome. you know, here's the timeline we have to respond to that. It's going to delay things some. Any given moment in a case, often for engaged victims, and not all victims are engaged, like the co-op is really good at just sending me a restitution request, which, speaking of people who didn't sign up to deal with numbers, advocates are also acting as essentially insurance agents for, you know, criminal litigation, which is a weird role, and can be burdensome in some of the property crime cases, especially the wide crime spree type ones. But I would say that most of what I'm doing is like spending time talking to people, explaining changes, like I said, reaching out when things have changed, right? They didn't know that a record with a criminal history was going to be able to be expunged because we amended the charge 5 years ago. They didn't know that that was coming. So, you know, doing the reach back work for even, so 600 active cases maybe. And then now we've opened the door to, now we have to notify them of midpoint review. Now we have to notify them of sealing and expunging. Now we have to notify them of earned time credit reduction. Like, so now we're talking about cases that have been adjudicated for years and years, and those are not numbers that we can quantify really. So it's a lot. And I think the people who are harmed, like we serve our communities best when we are taking care of the people who are harmed. And if they are well served, we get really good criminal justice outcomes, ones that are meaningful, that are related to risk reduction, public safety, all the things we want to achieve here.
Other questions? Anybody? Yeah, Ian.
I just wanted to thank you very much for being here. And if you could speak, not only are all of those things true about a victim advocate's role and how it affects the criminal justice system, but I also, if you would speak to it for a moment, believe that it plays a role in effectively resolving a case. And if you
Yeah.
could speak to that just for a moment, because I think we also talk all about the backlog and
Mhm.
taking care of victims in our communities and people who are victims of crimes for all of the other reasons also important. But I think talking about the backlog and resolving a case and how the victim's role in that and how they're treated is an element. So I was wondering if you could speak to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Ian. That's a really good point, and I'd love to speak to it. I will say that I'm proud of the fact that I'm really well known for getting really fast resolutions in cases of domestic violence, which is why I take them. And all of that is because of the faith, like the night it happens, we're taking the call. The morning of, I'm on the phone with this person. The worst thing just happened to them. There is a lot of crisis management going on there. And because I've been in this work so long and I have such great partnerships with my deputy state's attorneys and my state's attorney, I have a ton of autonomy in like translating. The victim is telling me he has a substance abuse issue. This is not the first time this happened. There's a lot of information they're giving to me that I'm required under the law to disclose. So I have to make sure I'm getting all the information I need to the prosecutor to disclose to defense. So everyone's getting like a fair shake of what's really going on. But also I'm identifying what is going to be a criminal justice outcome that is meaningful in this case. And like, what's our bottom line? Like I'm trying to get there the fastest we can in week 1, week 2. And we can be very successful if we are working together closely and we're being completely transparent. Like it's one of the reasons we don't have confidentiality, and there's a role for confidential advocates in supporting victims, but it is really important to have an advocate that has the relationships with law enforcement, with the state's attorneys, with defense attorneys. Like there are defense attorneys that come to me and are like, can you talk to your deputy? You know, can you talk to your deputy? Like my person would do this. I know this is what the survivor wants. Like we just really need to resolve XYZ issue. And we see much faster results when it just gets everybody on the same page so much faster. And everybody, I think, defendants, victims, criminal justice players are all happy with those outcomes. It's just better. And I will say, if you look at Windsor County's numbers, like Washington, like we've been very effective at clearing the backlog, which requires a lot of work that we're just putting in without being resourced.
Coach, your question?
Megan, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Coach. How are you? Nice to see you.
How has, we're looking at a number of adjustments to youth intersection,
Yeah.
you know, in the justice system. How is that affecting, you know, the response, you know, those cases, you know, that involve, you know, those marginal.
I mean, I can speak only to the victim survivor experience, really. I'll kind of leave the broader questions to the experts in the room. Maybe there are none. It's complicated things. It's made things pretty complicated. It's sort of muddied the waters in terms of what victim survivor rights are in that realm. And it's an ever moving target that really does put a drag on the successful, like the completion of a case, right? Because we have plenty, especially our most serious cases, unfortunately. It comes up the most for me in sexual assault cases where it's like we're talking about a like 18, 19-year-old engaging in some sexual violence of some nature, very impacted parties, and they're eligible to file for youthful offender status, and they do, and then it transfers to the family court. And then there's some delay there. What I can tell them is a little bit more limited. And what I will say is like the opacity of the system is something that advocacy has been really tasked with like eliminating for survivors. And it makes all the difference in the world, because even when I'm explaining something that is not, the justice system never makes anybody feel good. Like, let's not pretend it does. But if they understand what's going on and they have a voice and they're afforded the opportunity to like make that voice heard and they feel seen, it's a game changer. Like they're just not as, it really is transformative. But I think the youthful offender piece really does sort of make it a little difficult to polish that lens for survivors. Thanks for the question.
Just quick. If we become more efficient and find a way to make the docket go quicker, you're gasping for air now, you're gonna be drowning, right? And then,
Yeah.
so the only thing you could do is prioritize which cases that you're gonna be able to dedicate services to. Are you already doing that? Are you?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, Zach did speak to the issue, and if I didn't say it or it wasn't clear, I fully endorse his framing of this issue, and I think he did a really nice job of it. We are triaging all of the time. All of the time. And I appreciate that he highlighted the fact that, like, yes, felonies are serious, homicides are serious. We deal with most of those too. But misdemeanor domestic assault cases are some of the most difficult work that I do, because you don't have as much leverage, really complex trauma dynamics, and limited tools to respond in a system that is, those cases moving slowly is one of the worst things we do in terms of criminal justice outcomes for survivors.
Turns into a felony later on, or worse.
Right. I mean, oftentimes what we just see is like the litigation goes on so long that they're picking up additional charges because we have not intervened or done anything to mitigate the risk of violence within that relationship. Right. And we're breaking families apart. We're imposing conditions that it doesn't work. So survivors get exhausted and then they want the case to just go away. But we've done nothing to support their partner doing better and being safer.
Go ahead, Ken.
Have you ever testified before?
Not before this committee, I don't think. No.
Any committee in this building?
I did testify recently in front of institutions about Vine and earn time. But I'm new. Can you tell?
I think you're very, very excellent.
Oh, thank you so much, Ken. I appreciate that. Thank you. I didn't even prepare, so don't endorse that. I was too busy. I want to. Great. I'm
Good job.
talk about what we're doing.
So let's just be perfectly clear. I'm glad you didn't. And you're spot on, and it's great testimony.
Thank you so much, Ken. I appreciate everything.
Probably not supposed to say that, but I really don't care because I don't follow rules.
Oh, good. Me either.
Pressure's on for everybody else.
Can we?
Did Kenneth leave?
There, because my next question was gonna be whether Ken was gonna support our
Mine
budget
was
and ask
gonna
for
be
additional
very-
victim advocates.
That's lovely when I get her earrings. That's
Oh,
my
Angela, your earrings.
Yes, where's the earrings?
Friday afternoon.
Okay.
They're great.
Very like kid.
All right, so we're gonna lose some people, but we're not gonna lose everybody, so it's sorry.
I'm gonna follow the
Yes, get it. No, no, no. I want to hear from you as well, and I know that some of these folks have to pick up kids. And
Oh, yeah, no problem at all. I'll take a little pressure off, I think. How are you?
Great, how are you?
Nice to meet you. I know we've worked a little bit
Oh,
on the
yeah.
computer, so. Hi, thank you. Thank you for asking me here. My name is Jennifer Bouffard. I'm the administrative coordinator for the Chittenden County State's Attorney's Office, and I am just a few months shy of 35 years with that office.
Congrats.
Thank you, thank you. So I didn't prepare that much either. I was hoping for more questions than me sort of lecturing all of you, but I will tell you that on a daily basis, my biggest job is protecting the advocates and the attorneys from having to, triage what it is we do every day. It's difficult for us as admins to tell a victim, I'm sorry, the victim advocate is not available. Your hearing isn't until May. They will call you the first week of May. That's hard for a victim to hear, or even a witness. We, as an admin, I'm responsible for issuing subpoenas based on the direction from my attorney. And then that person has a law enforcement officer knock at their door at 8 o'clock at night, hand them this piece of paper. They call me the next morning and I say, I'm so sorry, but that hearing isn't until April. My attorney will call you, hopefully the week before. But you will have 5 minutes to talk to them the day of the hearing. If you could please come in and we'll assist you. But because of the volume of the caseload, we as admins spend so much time trying to smooth over the stress of the community that we have to engage with on a daily basis. I think that's the biggest, hurdle to overcome. It's not the work. It's not the 5,000 cases that we receive in a year. It's not processing those. It's how do we please this person who's calling today when I can't help them today? When I know that my victim advocate isn't available for the next 3 weeks because she's helping to prepare for a trial and then in a homicide trial. And how can I help my counterpart in Grand Isle County, who's a part-time person and wants to take a week's vacation, and their office still needs to function. It's those responsibilities that we every day are concerned with. Having people come to our lobby and say, I was victimized last night and the police department told me to come here. I'm sorry, they're not coming to court for 6 weeks. You're not going to hear from anybody until 7 or 8 weeks. You're not entitled to services until a charging decision has been made, until that case has been processed. We have witnesses who, I called 911 last night. I saw this driver weaving. The police came. What does that mean for me? Well, if there's a charging decision, then you may be called to testify. You might be called to deposition. If it's a felony case, you might have to come to court for a trial. Well, I'm moving in 3 weeks. What am I supposed to do? This is disruptive to my life. And we as admins have to smooth that over because the attorneys don't have time to talk to those witnesses this early on, at this stage of the game. They're just trying to review the 5 new cases that have come in today for them. They're trying to get through the court hearings that they're scheduled for that day. And they're trying to answer to law enforcement who has questions about a case they're investigating, or a search warrant that they want to obtain, or they're on call for the week. And so they were woken up at 3 a.m. because law enforcement had a car on the side of the road. Like, it is a nonstop event that we feel disappointed we feel the disappointment that the community is feeling because we can't give them the individual special attention they deserve. Yes.
Oh, that's what I think.
Oh, sorry.
I do follow some rules. How many of these cases, and maybe this has already been asked because I've missed most of the afternoon, but how many people, reoccurring people do you see all the time over and over?
Daily. Daily, we have individuals. Daily.
That must be a comforting waste of time.
It's tiring, but it's my job. And so a good example that I can sort of a life example I can give you is we were all feeling pretty good about Tuesday morning, having had Monday off, a long weekend. We typically think it's going to be a big, but because of the snowstorm, we were all feeling pretty good. Everybody had to stay home. No, everybody's minding their own business. We had 13 individuals who were either lodged at the facility or issued a citation to appear in court that morning, Tuesday morning, that we have to process before 9:30 to file with the court. And 4 of them were individuals that we had seen the previous week.
Oh, that was a comforting day out.
So, right?
How is, so I would assume you're handling this too. What about expungements? How's the expungement and, oh, I like it.
You're asking a lot now because I'm responsible for expungements and sealings in my office. I'm trying to read the room. I don't know.
No, you're here to just say it the way it needs to be said. Whatever's on your mind. If I'm allowed to say that, even if I'm not. Listen, I don't like politicians and I don't like lawyers. I tolerate it. But I want actual fact-to-fact stuff, so maybe we can do good things around here to help you, because it wears on you, it wears on me as a so-called lawmaker and that P word, right?
Mhm.
Because we're all in this together and we're trying to all get, we don't agree how to get to the same area, but I'm sick of the catch and release. I'm sick of law enforcement being out there on the streets all the time, putting their lives on the line. And for the most part, and I'm talking as myself, nobody else, I've made that perfectly clear because I've got a feeling I'm going to get chewed. But the point of the matter is, they're putting themselves out there on the line, right? For other people's safety all the time. All I'm doing is hearing about a damn court backlog all the time. And we know we got the same old people all the time, like some person up there, 1,800 and some times that has been arrested, that is clearly mental health needed. And God help us all if something happens where to be fully incarcerated, somebody else pays that price, which has already been proven in this state. So I'm a little bit fired up today, by the way. So
I see.
So do you have a question?
Yeah.
Like, or you testifying?
my question is, how do we fix it?
Oh my.
Oh, boy.
Don't put no pressure on you. We've been working on this for the past.
Yeah, I've been here 7 years. How do we fix it? And haven't accomplished it.
So I am responsible for the ceilings and expungements.
No, you're not. We are.
Yes.
We burdened that with you.
I am responsible for processing those ceilings and expungements in my office. Recently, in the course of the last 6 months, what I have seen is the court has added three positions to process those. We had a full-time limited service position in my office, and that person was responsible for processing those. In October, that position was cut to part-time and was cut to a temporary position. So I had to take the ceilings and expungements back from her because we have other day-to-day tasks that she needs to work on. So she ended her tenure of doing those in October. She processed 9 motions, 9 orders. I started in November and I processed over 300. Where in my day did I find the time to do that when I'm supposed to support the state's attorney, her chief deputy, the deputy state's attorney who handles the sex crimes, one other attorney, I'm the leader for 6 admin staff, and I'm the go-to because I've been in that office for 35 years. So I am now, since November was great, I've kept up with it, but since November, I am now 4 weeks behind. I have over 500 of those orders sitting in my inbox, waiting for me to process. It worries me because those individuals are entitled to have those processed. That's what their rights are. They applied for this, got it done, and I'm sitting on it. But I'm also sitting on some that the individual still has pending cases, and they have cases that are being sealed at this point. I'm not sure what that goal is. I'm not sure how that helps them in this process, other than to burden my day with those orders. I think that, and this is me personally doing my job. This is not testifying as part of the department. This is me doing my job, that I get orders of individuals who are deceased that I have to process like every other order. What is the point of that? Why am I processing an order to seal a case on an individual who's deceased? I'm getting that order because it's an automatic expungement, it's an automatic seal, so the court just processes it. One of their 3 full-time positions just processes it and sends it to me to process. And my choice is this week, do I process those orders, or do I work to support my chief deputy who's preparing for a homicide case, a homicide trial, and she's asked me to schedule 12 witnesses for meetings next week. The homicide trial has to come first, and so these get set on the back burner. It's a struggle. I absolutely agree with seals and expungements. I absolutely believe that they can help an individual with their future. And so it disheartens me that I can't process it timely because that's their right. But I have to deal with this homicide. I have to deal with this immediate. That's the triage. Those are the priorities we have to figure out on a daily basis.
And let me just ask a follow-up. So when you're getting those, it's because the state's attorney has to decide whether to object or that.
No, these are
orders that they have been expunged, and you have to.
I get both. So I have in my inbox, I have about a dozen motions that the court has sent to us where an individual has filed making the request.
Right.
I have to process that, send it to the state's attorney, who then makes her decision and sends it back to me. And I then have to upload it into the court's Odyssey system.
Right. Okay.
And then I get the orders from the court where the judge has says, yes, this can be sealed or this can be expunged. And those are they're complicated orders. It's not this case, it's this individual on this count can be sealed.
Right.
And then I have to check the court system to ensure that I'm sealing the correct count, because our counts in our database don't always match the counts in the court's database. And sometimes I can't even decipher it. Because if an individual is charged with 3 counts of retail theft on one day, 1 at Walmart, 1 at Home Depot, and 1 at Best Buy, which count pertains to which store and which count did the court intend to seal? And I have to try to figure that out when the court's record is already sealed, so I can't see it.
Coach has questions.
Can I just finish?
Oh, I didn't. We're not done. Go ahead.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Sensing a lot of frustration after working from this committee's perspective, you know, to try to help facilitate accuracy of the data and the database. So I'm trying to sit in my annoyance right now with the fact that you're experiencing what you are experiencing, because that means it's affecting all 14 counties and every Vermonter that experiences the system. And that is annoying at this very moment. And, you know, so just pumping more money, you know, at it and seeing the same result seems to correlate with that adage of insanity. So just needed to make that point.
Thank you.
So I try to follow the rules and not testify and answer questions. But actually, I'm gonna testify.
Look out who the lawyer is in the room.
I just really want to thank you for coming and testifying for us. I really think it's easy for us to talk to lawyers and hear about deputy state's attorneys, no offense or anything, but hear about caseloads and backlogs and things. But hearing your experience and the frontline work that you're doing it's quieter work in a way that we don't get that story. And so I think it's so important for our committee to hear it. And I think a lot about when individuals interface with the government, and sometimes they don't very often. And that experience in that moment, and the fact that you're in that role and you're interfacing with people, and it might be the first time that they've interacted with the government in really any way. And that on top of that, you're in an impossible position because of the overwork and the lack of resources. So I just really appreciate you coming in.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you very much. Unless there are other questions.
Yeah, I know. Sorry.
I'll vouch for her. She's hard working.
Thank you, Tom.
And that was a thank you to the witness. That's okay.
Which I think is a caveat.
That's fine. I'm thanking the witness. That's different. Did you see how that worked, Ken? All right, so
You've only been here a month.
I know. And you.
Making things open, I guess. Maybe at my expense, I
No,
don't
not at all.
know. I'm teasing.
So, I do want to hear the budget details, but we're going to absolutely need to have a 5-minute coffee break.
Yes.
And so we'll go off live and be back in 5 minutes, and hopefully, even if I don't have a quorum, I'm going to plug ahead because I need to have those numbers to understand